and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we begin a new year. Happy New Year. My radio producer told me that my show was too short.
I don't fully understand!
Well, he explained it this way. Add more stuff. So, I added more stuff to the show.
Ron, does that mean I will get more airtime?
Yes, it does, British guy. It does. On the show this week, we have so many stories. We have a haunted limousine, a strange follower, and I take a turn and tell a story that happened to me.
Wow!
I know. We also have an H.G. Wells classic that is not science fiction called The Red Room.
H.G. Wells. Ron, that can't be right, can it?
It can. Hard to believe, but it's true. Speaking of true, we have a Washington edition of
Johnny, is this true?
And it all begins with this 5-minute mystery.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by spiders and their amazing webs. Humans have been making use of spider silk for thousands of years. The ancient Greek used them to stop bleeding, and the Aborigines of Australia used silk as fishing lines. It is an incredibly strong and versatile material.
This has been your noonday program of news. The weather for this afternoon is cloudy and overcast, with probably showers this evening.
Why do you bother with that radio, Wrighton? There's never anything new.
What else is there to do around a firehouse, Edens?
Sleep and go to fires.
We'll be going to enough fires, all right, if they don't catch that arsonist who's been trying to burn up the whole city.
Yeah, I'd like to get my hands on that devil.
Maybe we will, Edens. Maybe we will.
Holy smoke, here we go again.
Watch that baby burn.
Looks like the end of the world, doesn't it?
If they don't get their bloodhounds after that firebug, it soon will be.
Hey, who's that guy the chief's dragging along here?
I don't know, but he's really got a grip on his arm.
Maybe it's the firebug.
Hey, Chief, who's the man you're holding?
The rat who's been setting all these fires.
Where are you taking him?
Down to the station. Put out this blaze and hurry along.
You hear that, Wrighton? Pour on the water. I want to see a firebug get singed.
You still deny that you set that fire?
Let me call my lawyer. You can't question me this way. It's illegal.
Let me go to work on him, Chief.
That won't be necessary, Edens. I'm sure this prolific arsonist will come clean in just a few minutes.
You got no proof?
You were seen running out of the burning building just as the engines pulled up. How did the fire start?
Listen, pal, I tell you I don't know. Now will you let me go?
Why did you wait till the fire had gained so much headway before you finally ran out?
I just woke up and I heard your sirens drawing near the building.
Listen, my friend. We're out to break this cycle of arson that's been slowly destroying the city. You're in for some pretty rough weather ahead unless you come clean and tell me how that fire started. The sooner you give me the truth, the easier it'll go with you.
All right, Chief, I'll play ball with you. The whole fire was an accident.
What?
Yeah, I swear it was. I really went in there to get some sleep. And when I woke up, I lit a cigarette. And that was my big mistake. The building was so old it was almost falling apart, and there were cobwebs hanging all over the place. While I was shaking out the flame of the match, it hit some of the cobwebs hanging from the low beams, and that was it. Webs caught fire and spread to the roof, and the dry wood began to burn in a flash. What do we do now, Chief?
Take him to the police and book him on a charge of arson. His story shows that he deliberately set that fire.
What lie in the firebug story did the chief detect? In just a moment, we'll know, but first...
But this time we have a pretty laid out story. In fact, we have a confession. The question is, was it an accident or a crime? What is the contingent factor that would prove guilt or innocence? What do you say we go and find out?
And now, back to our story.
What are you talking about, Chief? I told you it was an accident.
If it was, you would have told a different story. You see, there was one very important flaw in your story that condemned it as a lie.
Prove it.
You said that the cobwebs caught fire and spread to the roof. Well, I'm afraid that isn't quite accurate. Unfortunately for you, cobwebs don't flame. All right, boys, take him away. Our firebug needs cooling off.
There you have it, friends. Cobwebs don't burn. That means he was lying and, of course, makes him guilty. Now, you know me, and I had to know, do cobwebs burn? Well, spider silk does shrivel quite rapidly when exposed to intense heat, so yes, a flamethrower can clear out cobwebs. But it doesn't actually burn, much less cause the pyrotechnics that people have come to expect in fiction. How about that?
What's that you say?
I want to say this is the first podcast of 2020. It's so hard to believe that we've actually made it to 2020. There was a time I wasn't so sure. As a kid, we had nuclear air raid drills during school. The idea being that diving under your desk would save you from nuclear fallout. Kind of stupid when you really think about it. Anyway, welcome to 2020, the year of the metal rat. Things that you have to look for this year. Well, here at Ron's Amazing Stories, we'll be testing some new segments to see if they stick. One of these was suggested by a listener that will upgrade the 5-Minute Mystery. I have begun creating new episodes that will highlight a day or time in history with short skits. Your job will be to guess the event. This will all be done in the 5-Minute Mystery format. Now, if you want to take part in creating these or even play character roles, please let me know by using the comment page on the main website. I personally think this idea is going to be a hit. I've been asked by several people how you can donate to the podcast. I don't ever ask for donations to the show, but if you feel like sending one my way, I do have a donate button on the main webpage. Just scroll down a bit and you will see it in the How to Support Us section. I do thank you for asking. I'm looking to do another ghost story themed show. So, I'm looking for your scary stories about ghost encounters. This time, I want to focus just on the spirits and see what happens. I'm also looking for a co-host for this. So if you have any suggestions or even want to apply for the job, let me know. I'm open to anything. That's all I have for this time, so let's get on with the show with this message from our sponsor, Audible. Today's podcast is being brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, computer, Kindle. Whatever you have, you can listen to Audible on it. So what am I listening to right now? 22 short sci-fi stories, a flash fiction collection narrated by James K. White. This is a collection of 22 science fiction stories that range from tales of time travel, dystopian futures, the apocalypse, aliens, genetic engineering, and so much more. They are very short and so very well written and narrated. Truly a welcome addition to my collection. And if I'm being honest, they had me at short stories, my bread and butter. The novel was written by Angela Kavanaugh, who is a Amazon bestseller. She began writing in high school between and during classes. Eventually, she realized that writing could be more than a hobby. She fell in love with flash fiction and began posting the short stories to her blog. 22 Short Stories, a flash fiction collection, reached number 6 on the Amazon bestseller list and is a popular selection on Audible. What makes these short stories exceptional is the way you immediately understand the bigger picture of the world and its dynamics. In just a few sentences. It is very well written. Now, you can own these 22 stories today. Here's what Audible has set up for us. Audible is offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can get 22 stories free today. Thank you, Audible. And now it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
This week, we have 3 incredible stories sent in for the show. One of them by yours truly. Our first story comes from New York by Samuel McCarthy. Sam is a limousine driver for a major firm and has driven pop stars and royalty across the great city. He's been driving for them since 2001 and says that he has a number of great stories that he wants to share with us. He's also writing a book titled Confessions of an Irish Cabbie, which is set to release in late 2020. Here is his story titled Limo Number 613. When I graduated from high school, I really didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I worked part-time for my father's taxi service and continued doing that for most of the 1990s. In 1999, I decided to step out on my own and start a freelance limo service. I was not able to compete, so I sold my business to the biggest limousine company in New York and have been working for them ever since. A lot of strange things happen when you're driving the rich and famous around, but the strangest one of all? Well, that has to be the one that I experienced when I was alone. It occurred in limo number 613. But first, let me tell you all about that car. The word limousine is derived from the name of the French limousin, which is a particular part of a carriage that physically resembles the raised hood of a cloak worn by the shepherds of the time. The name was then extended to this particular type of car with a permanent top protecting over the chauffeur. This type of automobile had an enclosed passenger compartment seating 3 to 5 persons, with only a roof projecting forward over the open driver's area in the front. Limo number 613 was a 2010 Cadillac DTS sedan. This is your typical for-hire car, the type you would find at proms, weddings, and special taxi services. One night, my coworker and friend, we'll call him Carlos, was coming home from a gig. He was carjacked about 2 a.m. in the morning. Before he could raise the bulletproof windows, he was shot in the head and his body was thrown out onto the street. The car was found 2 days later in an alley, left with the driver's door open and the motor running. There wasn't a single scratch on the vehicle except for the blood of my friend on the front seat. After a lengthy investigation, the car was eventually returned to us. It was cleaned and put back into service. No one wanted to drive that car. It was, in fact, and it felt like, it was cursed. When you drove it, it would do strange things, like stop on its own, break down in heavy traffic, and even try to veer into traffic. It got to the point where it would sit in the garage for months on end without being used, only seeing the light of day when things were busy or other cars were unavailable. This is where my story begins. I was set to pick up a celeb at the airport. My car was being serviced and I had to pull from the pool. Just my luck, the only car left was number 613. I tried to find an alternative, but nothing was available, so I took the keys and drove to the airport, saying a prayer as I went. The trip went off without a hitch. The car behaved, and I was able to do my transport with no issues. After I made my drop-off and I was heading home, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Carlos sitting next to me. It was a full version of my friend, and he was smiling. I felt a peace wash over me like I had never felt before. My mind went blank, and from that point on I was unaware of what I was doing. But somehow I arrived back at the garage, safe and sound. I turned in the car and went home. That night, I had a dream. It was of Carlos and the conversation we had while driving to the garage. It went like this. Carlos said, "Hello, my friend." "Carlos, is that you?" I replied. "Si. I've been waiting for you for a very long time." "You've been here this whole time?" He sighed and said, "I have." I thought for a moment and asked, "Can I help you?" "You can, my friend. I need you to deliver a message to my wife. She is sad, and I need you to tell her that I love her, always will, and the papers that she is looking for are in a locked box in the attic closet. The key died with me, but it shouldn't be too hard to find someone to unlock it. Can you do that, Sam?" He faded away, and I awoke. I didn't know what to do at first, but I knew that I had to tell Carlos' wife what had happened. I felt silly, but when I told my story, she began to cry. We went upstairs together and found a locked box in the closet, just as Carlos had said. Inside was the life insurance policy that she had been looking for since his death. I know most will dismiss this story. All I have to say is that after this occurred, Limo 613 never had another issue. It was sold in 2015 to another limousine service for $22,000, and as far as I know, it's still out there today. Samuel McCarthy, New York. Well, Sam, let me say first that it was a pleasure to talk with you on the phone. I thank you for allowing me to tell your story and Carlos's as well. It truly was amazing. I also thank you for the history lesson on the origins of the limousine. I found this to go along with what you said. Rich owners of expensive carriages and their passengers were accustomed to their own private compartment, leaving their coachman or driver outside in all types of weather. When automobiles arrived on the scene, people required a similar arrangement for their chauffeurs, such as the 1916 definition of limousine, which is a closed car seating 3 to 5 inside with the driver's seat outside. In Great Britain, the limousine de ville had no weather protection. The limousine landaulet had a removable or folding roof that still doesn't sound all that fun for the chauffeur. Thank you for your story, Sam. I truly do appreciate it. This next story comes from Persons and Parts Unknown. Remember that if you want credit for your story, you have to tell me who you are. Here is the story that I have called My Man in Dated Clothing. So about 2 years ago, I was living at my aunt's house because my mom was sick and in the hospital. My dad was having to stay with her. One night, we were sitting in the living room watching TV. All of a sudden, I got this feeling that I needed to look outside. So I turned my head and looked through the big window and nearly passed out. Because when I looked there was a man standing there clear as day. I knew he was a spirit because he was dressed in really dated clothes, and he had this haze to him like you could almost see through him. He smiled at me and said that my mom was going to be fine and not to worry. Next day, word came that she would recover and soon would be able to come home. My aunt never saw or heard anything. Since that day, I see him and he follows me. I would see him in my room and find some random pictures of him on my phone. At first, I was a little scared because, well, why is this spirit thingy following me? And why is he in my house? Since then, I've grown accustomed to seeing him and not being scared. I notice when he comes and goes because I can sense when he is around. Sent in by someone from parts unknown. Well, someone, thank you for your story. Now, if this was your story, please write me so that I can include your name in the show notes. Also, if I had to guess, sounds to me like you have a guardian angel. Thanks again for your story. Our last story comes from me. That's right, your very own podcaster. It happened on December 19th, and I report it just as the events occurred. I call my story The Miracle Tree. It was a dark and rainy night. I was relaxing watching an NBA game when I heard a crash of epic proportions. It literally shook the entire house from floor to ceiling. I set about to find out what happened. I grabbed my industrial-sized flashlight and headed outside. As I said, it was a dark night. Add in 30-mile-an-hour winds and heavy rains, and I just couldn't find anything that accounted for the noise. I gave up, promising myself to continue looking in the morning. I went back to my game, telling everyone in the house that I didn't see anything bad. The next morning, the 30-mile-an-hour winds were still raging, but the rain had died down. After a leisurely breakfast and morning conversation, I decided to head out and continue my investigation. What I found made my heart stop and a cold chill run through my body. For the entire night, a 150-foot maple tree was leaning over at about a 70-degree angle over my house. It was swaying back and forth in rhythm with the strong winds. I ran inside and called 911. The fire department arrived, and they, too, watched in awe. One of them said that he could not for the life of Mary figure out why the tree wasn't falling. A few minutes later, the city forester arrived on the scene. He told me that they couldn't do anything about it until it actually fell on the house. Then they could take action. He continued with that my only course of action was to call in professional help and gave me the number for a local arborist. He did make one final statement. He said, "You can't cut the tree down since it's not on your property. However, you can cut the parts that are hanging over your property." He did apologize for the bad news. The arborist arrived. He was a young man named Travis. He took one look at the tree and exclaimed, "Why hasn't the tree fallen over yet?" Well, after much deliberation and consultation, the fire department left. I think they understood that they were blocking what needed to be done. They left and wished us luck. You see, the property that the tree was rooted on is undeveloped and is privately owned. If it had been city property, they would have taken care of the problem right then and there. Travis called in help, and after another nerve-wracking hour, they were finally in place to take the tree down. Travis climbed a nearby 200-foot Douglas fir and dropped ropes down to the top of the falling tree. The two men systematically cut the tree back, lowering huge limbs safely to the ground. Finally, they had it trimmed back enough that the final cut could be made. These two men somehow made a 100-foot tree fall the opposite direction from what it was leaning. It fell harmlessly the other way, not even hitting a nearby fence or other trees in the area. It truly was an amazing thing to watch. Now, why didn't the tree fall? I'll leave that for you to decide. I do know this. My family has lived in this house one way or another since 1964. In that time, many trees have fallen, and even fallen right near the house, but never on it. You see, my mother once told me that she prayed for protection for this home. My guess is that protection has held for over 50 years. I have no other explanation. I will include in the show notes pictures that stand as proof that all of this actually happened. Thank you for letting me tell my story.
As read by Amazing Stories, read by amazing people.
Our featured story this week comes from the pen of H.G. Wells. It is a tale that he was inspired to write after reading selected works by H.P. Lovecraft. It is a ghost story written by a man of science, and it will compel you to listen. It is called The Red Room, and was published by the Harper brothers in 1898 in the book 30 Strange Stories by H.G. Wells. It is expertly read for us by Peter Bishop.
The Red Room by H.G. Wells. "It's your own choosing," said the man with the withered arm once more. I heard the faint sound of a stick and a shambling step on the flags in the passage outside. The door creaked on its hinges as a second old man entered, more bent, more wrinkled, more aged even than the first. He supported himself by the help of a crutch. His eyes were covered by a shade, and his lower lip, half averted, hung pale and pink from his decaying yellow teeth. He made straight for an armchair on the opposite side of the table, sat down clumsily, and began to cough. The man with the withered hand gave the newcomer a short glance of positive dislike. The old woman took no notice of his arrival, but remained with her eyes fixed steadily on the fire. "I said it's your own choosing," said the man with the withered hand, when the coughing had ceased for a while. "It's my own choosing," I answered. The man with the shade became aware of my presence for the first time, and threw his head back for a moment and sideways to see me. I caught a momentary glimpse of his eyes, small and bright and inflamed. Then he began to cough and splutter again. "Why don't you drink?" said the man with the withered arm, pushing the beer toward him. The man with the shade poured out a glassful with a shaking hand that splashed half as much again on the deal table. A monstrous shadow of him crouched upon the wall and mocked his action as he poured and drank. I must confess I had scarcely expected these grotesque custodians. There is, to my mind, something inhuman in senility, something crouching and atavistic. The human qualities seem to drop from old people insensibly day by day. The three of them made me feel uncomfortable with their gaunt silences, their bent carriage, their evident unfriendliness to me and to one another. And that night, perhaps, I was in the mood for uncomfortable impressions. I resolved to get away from their vague foreshadowings of the evil things upstairs. "If," said I, "you will show me to this haunted room of yours, I will make myself comfortable there." The old man with the cough jerked his head back so suddenly that it startled me, and shot another glance of his red eyes at me from out of the darkness under the shade. But no one answered me. I waited a minute, glancing from one to the other. The old woman stared like a dead body, glaring into the fire with lackluster eyes. If, I said a little louder, if you will show me to this haunted room of yours, I will relieve you from the task of entertaining me. There's a candle on the slab outside the door, said the man with the withered hand, looking at my feet as he addressed me. But if you go to the Red Room tonight, this night of all nights, said the old woman softly, you go alone. Very well, I answered shortly. And which way do I go? You go along the passage for a bit, said he, nodding his head on his shoulder at the door, until you come to a spiral staircase, and on the second landing is a door covered with green baize. Go through that and down the long corridor to the end, and the Red Room is on your left up the steps. Have I got that right? I said, and repeated his directions. He corrected me in one particular. And you are really going? Said the man with the shade, looking at me again for the third time with that queer, unnatural tilting of the face. This night of all nights, whispered the old woman. It is what I came for, I said, and moved towards the door. As I did so, the old man with the shade rose and staggered round the table, so as to be closer to the others and to the fire. At the door I turned and looked at them, and saw they were all close together, dark against the firelight, staring at me over their shoulders, with an intent expression on their ancient faces. Good night, I said, setting the door open. It's your own choosing, said the man with the withered arm. I left the door wide open until the candle was well alight, and then I shut them in and walked down the chilly, echoing passage. I must confess that the oddness of these three old pensioners in whose charge her ladyship had left the castle, and the deep-toned, old-fashioned furniture of the housekeeper's room in which they had foregathered, had affected me curiously, in spite of my effort to keep myself at a matter-of-fact phase. They seemed to belong to another age, an older age, an age when things spiritual were indeed to be feared, when common sense was uncommon, an age when omens and witches were credible, and ghosts beyond denying. Their very existence, thought I, is spectral. The cut of their clothing, fashions born in dead brains, the ornaments and conveniences in the room about them even are ghostly. The thoughts of vanished men, which still haunt rather than participate in the world today. And the passage I was in, long and shadowy, with a film of moisture glistening on the wall, was as gaunt and cold as a thing that is dead and rigid. But with an effort, I sent such thoughts to the right about. The long, draughty subterranean passage was chilly and dusty, and my candle flared and made the shadows cower and quiver. The echoes rang up and down the spiral staircase, and a shadow came sweeping up after me, and another fled before me into the darkness overhead. I came to the wide landing and stopped there for a moment, listening to a rustling that I fancied I heard creeping behind me, and then, satisfied of the absolute silence, pushed open the unwilling baize-covered door and stood in the silent corridor. The effect was scarcely what I expected, for the moonlight coming in by the great window on the grand staircase picked out everything in vivid black shadow or reticulated silvery illumination. Everything seemed in its proper position. The house might have been deserted on the yesterday instead of 12 months ago. There were candles in the sockets of the sconces, and whatever dust had gathered on the carpets or upon the polished flooring was distributed so evenly as to be invisible in my candlelight. A waiting stillness was over everything. I was about to advance and stopped abruptly. A bronze group stood upon the landing, hidden from me by a corner of the wall, but its shadow fell with marvellous distinctness upon the white panelling and gave me the impression of someone crouching to waylay me. The thing jumped upon my attention suddenly. I stood rigid for half a moment, perhaps. Then, with my hand in the pocket that held the revolver, I advanced, only to discover a Ganymede and eagle glistening in the moonlight. That incident for a time restored my nerve, and a dim porcelain Chinaman on a buhl table, whose head rocked as I passed, scarcely startled me. The door of the Red Room and the steps up to it were in a shadowy corner. I moved my candle from side to side in order to see clearly the nature of the recess in which I stood before opening the door. Here it was, thought I, that my predecessor was found, and the memory of that story gave me a sudden twinge of apprehension. I glanced over my shoulder at the black Ganymede in the moonlight, and opened the door of the Red Room hastily, with my face half turned to the pallid silence of the corridor. I entered, closed the door behind me at once, turned the key I found in the lock within, and stood with the candle held aloft surveying the scene of my vigil. The great red room of Lorraine Castle, in which the young Duke had died, or rather in which he had begun his dying, for he had opened the door and fallen headlong down the steps I had just ascended. That had been the end of his vigil, of his gallant attempt to conquer the ghostly tradition of the place, and never, I thought, had apoplexy better served the ends of superstition. There were other and older stories that clung to the room, back to the half-incredible beginning of it all, the tale of a timid wife and the tragic end that came to her husband's jest of frightening her. And looking round that huge shadowy room with its black window bays, its recesses and alcoves, its dusty brown-red hangings and dark, gigantic furniture, one could well understand the legends that had sprouted in its black corners, its germinating darkness. My candle was a little tongue of light in the vastness of the chamber. Its rays failed to pierce to the opposite end of the room, and left an ocean of dull red mystery and suggestion, sentinel shadows and watching darknesses beyond its island of light, and the stillness of desolation brooded over it all. I must confess some impalpable quality of that ancient room disturbed me. I tried to fight the feeling down. I resolved to make a systematic examination of the place, and so, by leaving nothing to the imagination, dispel the fanciful suggestions of the obscurity before they obtained a hold upon me. After satisfying myself of the fastening of the door, I began to walk around the room, peering round each article of furniture, tucking up the valances of the bed and opening its curtains wide. In one place there was a distinct echo to my footsteps. The noises I made seemed so little that they enhanced rather than broke the silence of the place. I pulled up the blinds and examined the fastenings on the several windows. Attracted by the fall of a particle of dust, I leaned forward and looked up the blackness of the wide chimney. Then, trying to preserve my scientific attitude of mind, I walked round and began tapping the oak panelling for any secret opening. But I desisted before reaching the alcove. I saw my face in a mirror. White. There were 2 big mirrors in the room, each with a pair of sconces bearing candles, and on the mantel shelf too were candles in china candlesticks. All these I lit one after the other. The fire was laid, an unexpected consideration from the old housekeeper, and I lit it to keep down any disposition to shiver, and when it was burning well, I stood round with my back to it and regarded the room again. I had pulled up a chintz-covered armchair and a table to form a kind of barricade before me. On this lay my revolver, ready to hand. My precise examination had done me little good, but I still found the remoter darkness of the place and its perfect stillness too stimulating for the imagination. The echoing of the stir and the crackling of the fire was no sort of comfort to me. The shadow in the alcove at the end of the room began to display that undefinable quality of a presence, that odd suggestion of a lurking living thing that comes so easily in silence and solitude. And to reassure myself, I walked with a candle into it and satisfied myself there was nothing tangible there. I stood that candle upon the floor of the alcove and left it in that position. By this time I was in a state of considerable nervous tension. Although to my reason there was no adequate cause for my condition, my mind, however, was perfectly clear. I postulated quite unreservedly that nothing supernatural could happen, and to pass the time I began stringing some rhymes together, in Goldsby fashion, concerning the original legend of the place. A few I spoke aloud, but the echoes were not pleasant. For the same reason I also abandoned, after a time, a conversation with myself upon the impossibility of ghosts and haunting. My mind reverted to the 3 old and distorted people downstairs, and I tried to keep it upon that topic. The sombre reds and greys of the room troubled me. Even with its 7 candles, the place was merely dim. The light in the alcove flaring in a draught, and the fire flickering, kept the shadows and penumbra perpetually shifting and stirring in a noiseless, flighty dance. Casting about for a remedy, I recalled the wax candles I had seen in the corridor, and with a slight effort, carrying a candle and leaving the door open, I walked out into the moonlight and presently returned with as many as 10. These I put in the various knick-knacks of china with which the room was sparsely adorned, and lit and placed them where the shadows had lain deepest, some on the floor, some in the window recesses, arranging and rearranging them until at last my 17 candles were so placed that not an inch of the room had but the direct light of at least one of them. It occurred to me that when the ghost came, I could warn him not to trip over them. The room was now quite brightly illuminated. There was something very cheering and reassuring in these little silent streaming flames, and to notice their steady diminution of length offered me an occupation and gave me a reassuring sense of the passage of time. Even with that, however, the brooding expectation of the vigil weighed heavily enough upon me. I stood watching the minute hand on my watch creep towards midnight. Then something happened in the alcove. I did not see the candle go out. I simply turned and saw that the darkness was there, as one might start and see the unexpected presence of a stranger. The black shadow had sprung back to its place. "By Jove," I said aloud, recovering from my surprise, "that draft's a strong one." And taking the matchbox from the table, I walked across the room in a leisurely manner to relight the corner again. My first match would not strike, and as I succeeded with the second, something seemed to blink on the wall before me. I turned my head involuntarily and saw that the 2 candles on the little table by the fireplace were extinguished. I rose at once to my feet. "Odd," I said. "Did I do that myself in a flash of absent-mindedness?" I walked back, relit one, and as I did so, I saw the candle in the right sconce on one of the mirrors wink and go right out, and almost immediately its companion followed it. The flames vanished as if the wick had been suddenly nipped between a finger and thumb, leaving the wick neither glowing nor smoking, but black. While I stood gaping, the candle at the foot of the bed went out, and the shadows seemed to take another step towards me. "This won't do," said I, and first one and then another candle on the mantel-shelf followed. "What's up?" I cried, with a queer high note getting into my voice somehow. At that, the candle on the corner of the wardrobe went out, and the one I had relit in the alcove followed. "Steady on," I said. "Those candles are wanted," speaking with a half-hysterical facetiousness, and scratching away at a match the while for the mantel candlesticks. My hands trembled so much that twice I missed the rough paper of the matchbox. As the mantel emerged from darkness again, 2 candles in the remoter end of the room were eclipsed. But with the same match, I also relit the larger mirror candles and those on the floor near the doorway, so that for the moment I seemed to gain on the extinctions. But then in a noiseless volley there vanished 4 lights at once in different corners of the room, and I struck another match in quivering haste and stood hesitating whither to take it. As I stood undecided, an invisible hand seemed to sweep out the 2 candles on the table. With a cry of terror, I dashed at the alcove, then into the corner, and then into the window, relighting 3 as 2 more vanished by the fireplace, and then perceiving a better way, I dropped matches to the iron-bound deed box in the corner and caught up the bedroom candlestick. With this, I avoided the delay of striking matches, but for all that, the steady process of extinction went on, and the shadows I feared and fought against returned and crept in upon me. First a step gained on this side of me, and then on that. I was now almost frantic with the horror of the coming darkness, and my self-possession deserted me. I leapt panting from candle to candle in a vain struggle against that remorseless advance. I bruised myself in the thigh against the table. I sent a chair headlong. I stumbled and fell and whisked the cloth from the table in my fall. My candle rolled away from me, and I snatched another as I rose. Abruptly this was blown out as I swung it off the table by the wind of my sudden movement, and immediately the 2 remaining candles followed. But there was light still in the room, a red light that streamed across the ceiling and staved off the shadows from me. The fire! Of course I could still thrust my candle between the bars and relight it. I turned to where the flames were still dancing between the glowing coals and splashing red reflections upon the furniture, made 2 steps towards the grate, and incontinently the flames dwindled and vanished. The glow vanished, the reflections rushed together and disappeared, and as I thrust the candle between the bars, darkness closed upon me like the shutting of an eye, wrapped about me in a stifling embrace, sealed my vision, and crushed the last vestiges of self-possession from my brain. and it was not only palpable darkness, but intolerable terror. The candle fell from my hands. I flung out my arms in a vain effort to thrust that ponderous blackness away from me, and lifting up my voice, screamed with all my might, once, twice, thrice. Then I think I must have staggered to my feet. I know I thought suddenly of the moonlit corridor, and with my head bowed and my arms over my face, made a stumbling run for the door. But I had forgotten the exact position of the door, and I struck myself heavily against the corner of the bed. I staggered back, turned, and was either struck or struck myself against some other bulky furnishing. I have a vague memory of battering myself thus to and fro in the darkness, of a heavy blow at last upon my forehead, and a horrible sensation of falling that lasted an age, of my last frantic effort to keep my footing, and then I remember no more. I opened my eyes in daylight. My head was roughly bandaged, and the man with the withered hand was watching my face. I looked about me trying to remember what had happened, and for a space I could not recollect. I rolled my eyes into the corner and saw the old woman, no longer abstracted, no longer terrible, pouring out some drops of medicine from a little blue phial into a glass. "Where am I?" I said. "I seem to remember you, and yet I cannot remember who you are." They told me then, and I heard of the haunted red room as one who bears a tale. "We found you at dawn," said he, "and there was blood on your forehead and lips." I wondered that I'd ever disliked him. The three of them in the daylight seemed commonplace old folk enough. The man with the green shade had his head bent as one who sleeps. It was very slowly I recovered the memory of my experience. "You believe now," said the old man with the withered hand, "that the room is haunted?" He spoke no longer as one who greets an intruder, but as one who condoles with a friend. "Yes," said I, "the room is haunted." "And you have seen it, and we who have been here all our lives have never set eyes upon it, because we have never dared. Tell us, is it truly the old Earl who—" "No," said I, "it is not." "I told you so," said the old lady, with the glass in her hand. "It is his poor young countess who was frightened." "It is not," I said. "There is neither ghost of Earl nor ghost of Countess in that room. There is no ghost there at all, but worse, far worse, something impalpable." "Well?" they said. "The worst of all things that haunt poor mortal men," said I, "and that is, in all its nakedness, fear. Fear that will not have light nor sound, that will not bear with reason, that deafens and darkens and overwhelms. It followed me through the corridor. It fought against me in the room." I stopped abruptly. There was an interval of silence. My hand went up to my bandages. The candles went out one after the other, and I fled. Then the man with the shade lifted his face sideways to see me and spoke. "That is it," said he. "I knew that was it. A power of darkness to put such a curse upon a home. It lurks there always. You can feel it even in the daytime, even of a bright summer's day, in the hangings, in the curtains, keeping behind you however you face about. In the dusk it creeps in the corridor and follows you, so that you dare not turn. It is even as you say, fear itself is in that room, black fear. And there it will be, so long as this house of sin endures." End of The Red Room by H.G. Wells. Recording by Peter Bishop.
Well, what did you think of that one? Very old English, but I found myself haunted by the story and captivated by the talent of its reader, Peter Bishop. It had a feel to it that's hard to explain. But couldn't you feel the terror in that room? The Red Room is a short written by H.G. Wells in 1894. It was first published in the March 1896 edition of the Idler magazine, and then later added to his book, 30 Strange Stories by H.G. Wells. This story ranks among his most popular. Wells took a break from sci-fi to test the waters of Gothic horror. As he often did, Wells came up with a premise that has influenced many later works of fiction, pulp fiction, and pulp culture. A guy decides to spend the night in a haunted room to prove it's not haunted. All staples and stereotypes of the genre that was to come. And I do hope that you enjoyed it.
Johnny, is this true?
Okay, I like to surf the internet looking for stories and other oddities. I do this in the name of the podcast, but the truth is, it's fun to see what's out there. What you're about to hear is what I call
Johnny, is this true?
I will tell you a story and then ask the question, did I make it up or is it true? Let's get started. This time we have stories from my home state of Washington. So, let's get started. Story 1. Usually when moving cars and pedestrians collide, the walker ends up seriously injured. This time, Bellevue police say that the pedestrian was in the wrong after he ran into the side of a moving Tesla SUV. The man was thrown back into the crosswalk, but jumped to his feet and fled the scene on his skateboard. The Tesla, however, apparently didn't fare as well. There was significant damage to the side of the vehicle. The man was sought by police for this crime and was arrested. Now this has to be a pile of dung, right? Wrong. This was actually a crime since all parties must stop and exchange information, and that includes pedestrians. Bellevue police released the video of the incident, and it clearly shows a person dressed in black anxiously waiting to cross the street. Suddenly, the pedestrian crouches down and sprints across the intersection, nearly making it to the opposite curb. But the Tesla appears, and the pedestrian runs smack into the driver's door. I'll have a link to this video in the show notes. It truly is amazing. Sam Fuller of Seattle, Washington, sent this one in. Sam writes, a woman was seen strapped to the hood of a car. The driver was making her way around the city as if proud to show off his skill as a hunter. Many saw the horrific sight and called the police. The Seattle Police Department, using tips from callers, quickly tracked down the vehicle and apprehended the driver. Now, is Sam making this one up, or did the guy really do this? Well, if you said that this is fact, then you got it right. It appears it was a promotional stunt to get people to go to a fishing and hunting show that was planned for that weekend. Ticket sales had been light, so they came up with this scheme to promote it. In the end, it worked. The show was a success and offered selfies with the car and/or woman. Nutty, to say the least. Story 3. This next story also comes from Seattle, Washington. Perhaps it shouldn't come as any surprise that there is a lot of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, in Seattle's water. After all, it's the largest city in a state that has legalized recreational marijuana. But studies have shown the levels of THC are so high that Seattle ranks as number 1 in the world. Now, is this one true? By all that's holy and just, this one's a fact. That's what the new University of Washington study on drug use found. Based on current science, it appears that the level of carbioxy-THC was the highest detected in the world. UW researchers in 2016 tested Seattle's wastewater to get an idea of how prevalent marijuana usage is. They found that the rate of THC in Seattle's water is about 416 milligrams per 1,000 people. A joint with a gram of marijuana will likely contain, on average, 18 milligrams of THC. Seattle's population in 2017 stands at about 704,000 people, which means that there's an estimated 300,000 milligrams of THC in total in Seattle's water. That's about 1,700 individual joints, if my math is correct. How about that? Story 4. Our last story comes from Edgewood, Washington. A woman drove her car into the Pierce County Sheriff's Station there and then tried to melt the deputies with holy water. She believed that they were devils. The incident happened on a Sunday morning when an SUV rammed into the garage at the Edgewood Police Station. The deputy on duty walked outside and saw a red Ford Expedition backing into the garage. When he approached the SUV, he saw that the woman inside was holding a box cutter, a wooden staff, and a bottle of water. She told the officer that she was fleeing from Satan and believed that the police station was holy ground. Now, did this story happen, or is this a deviltry of a different type? Sadly, this one is true. While the officer talked to the woman, fellow patrolmen were able to disable her vehicle. She kept warning that she would douse the officers with holy water to melt them. Sergeant Glenn Carpenter asked the woman to splash him with water to prove he wouldn't melt. She held up the holy water and threatened again to melt Carpenter. He told her again, douse me with the water. And she did. Carpenter later wrote in the report of the incident, I didn't melt. She continued to fight the officers and rant about devils, but in the end gave up and was taken in for psychological treatment. Do you have any strange but true stories you want to share? If you do, send them to ronsamazingstories@gmail.com, and I'll use them if I can. Well, there you have it, podcast number 417. I need to thank Samuel McCarthy, someone from Parts Unknown, Sam Fuller, and Peter Bishop for being part of the show this week. I love you all. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, just head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find an amazing number of links that should fit every need. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it. And please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. This helps us to grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.